Well, welcome back to another episode of the Financially Free Journey podcast. And I'm your host, Courtney Dyer. And this podcast aims to dispel the seemingly complex topic of personal finances, money management, debt, savings, investing, and even retirement. And today I am bringing on a very special guest, Justin, and he is the founder and owner of Wealth Mode Financial Planning. And it's a financial and investment advisory firm that's really focused in on helping people pay off their student loan debt, but also being able to do things like buy a home and invest for their retirement. And Justin is an expert in his field when it comes to financial planning, and he's even been featured in places like Forbes, Yahoo Finance, and Bankrate. So Justin, welcome to the program. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Courtney. I've been really looking forward to this conversation all week.
Me too. You know what? I can't wait to get into it because, guys, Justin and I were just chatting before we started recording, but, we're going to be focusing in on student loans today. And, with the student loan debt in our country being between roughly like 43 to 45 million, or how much is it? 43 to 45 billion?
It's 43 to 45 million borrowers with the federal government now has over $1.5 trillion of student loan debt owed to them.
I mean, it's just the numbers are astronomical. When I was looking at that, I'm like, is that correct? So the 45 million Americans that carry student loan debt, we've got average balances, ranging around $36,000 per borrower for federal student loans. But when you look at student loan debt for high income earners like, doctors, lawyers, people that are in those types of professions, the student loan debt, like for medical school, for example, it averages over $200,000, and that's like excluding pre-med. So this is a crisis in our country, and Justin's work is absolutely changing lives. And so if you are a student loan borrower, if you're carrying debt, a loved one that's carrying debt, maybe a spouse or a family member, this episode is absolutely for you. So that way you can help them, because there are so many more strategies out there than just, buckling down and trying to pay it off as quickly as possible, specifically when it comes to student loan debt. So, Justin, just tell the listeners a little bit about your journey first, just becoming a financial planner, and why have you really focused and honed in on student loan debt in particular?
Sure. So I originally started out as a financial counselor, financial coach at a nonprofit agency, actually. And my first job in personal finance was helping families sort of financially rehabilitate from the effects of the recession. I'm talking about not kind of the COVID one. I'm talking about the 2008, 2009 one, right?
Oh, yeah.
It took several years for a lot of people to get back up to where they were. Maybe they had bankruptcies and foreclosures, and I would work with them over a couple of years to help them repair their situation, get back up on their feet, and qualify for being a homeowner again. Well, when I was at that job, I had this chance to go to a week-long conference in Seattle. For an entire week, I learned about the student loan industry and all the ins and outs of the federal student loan system. And my mind was sort of blown at how complex it was. The irony of it was, at some point, the federal government decided, and I think the intent was really good, let's try to make education more accessible to as many people as possible. And the way we're going to do that is by being a lender ourselves as the federal government and not put a lot of restrictions on who can access that and how much they can borrow. So that people can go get a college education. So great, as with a lot of huge policies in our country, I'm not taking a stance here. It's just complex enough that there's all these side effects that ended up happening from that initial decision that were kind of hard to predict at the time, right? So I think we've seen some of the side effects of that. Our college tuition inflation has been like triple the rate of regular inflation over the last 20, 25
Absolutely
years.
Insane.
Insane, right? Well, it makes sense, if I kind of joke, if someone stood outside Walmart and gave like really accessible loans or free gift cards to people, what would Walmart do? They'd say, hey, let's raise our prices. Everyone's getting free money coming in the door.
Absolutely.
That's exactly what's happened with the educational institutions, right? So I started learning about the history of that, how it all developed. And then when we got to the part in that conference where we were talking about all the different like income-driven repayment plans and all the forbearance and deferment rules, and I realized, wow, there's a lot of flexibility in this student loan planning space, which is great because as people became more and more burdened with debt and as the number of student loan borrowers in our country skyrocketed over the last couple decades, the government realized, people are struggling with this. We give really easy access to money, but there wasn't as much education or information, or the system was too rigid. And now they're having trouble once they enter their careers and are in that payoff period. And so it was never how complex the student loan system is today. Part of the reason for it is additional options and repayment plans and things have sort of been Frankensteined into the process one by one. It was never this perfect plan they set up from the beginning that said, well, let's get this harmonious set of options that all make sense. That's why it's so weird today is they've all been introduced at different times. And my mind was just blown. Like, how do people figure this stuff out on their own? And I kind of put it away and was like, this is good. I can help people at my current job that have these student loans come in. Well, fast forward a few years, I jumped into private practice as a financial planner. And I myself had been searching for a particular niche or maybe target area that I could specialize in. And I had always had this student loan thing in mind, but really the decision to decide to specialize in working with high student loan borrowers came when I started to see some of my own peers graduating from med school or law school or physical therapy, these professions where they have to borrow like $250,000 just to get their foot in the door and do what they're doing. And I had someone that I knew personally, but, back from high school say, that we were starting to chat about his student loan debt burden. And he said, man, sometimes I second guess if this is what I should have done. And that gnawed at me though. And I remember honestly, waking up that night and thinking about that. And I was like, this is so sad that this person chose to do what they're doing now. And a lot of these student loan professions are really valuable and necessary for our society, right? We need our healthcare professionals and we need our dentists and our attorneys for representation. But most people choose those professions because they like to help people. I know there's this view that they just do that because they want to make money. I've met a lot of them. Most of them, they want to contribute value to people's lives and serve people. And the secondary reason is maybe to have a good income. So it gnawed at me that these people were second guessing their choice to become what they were because of the psychological burden of their student loan debt. And that's where I made the decision to say, you know what, I need to serve this population of people who are burdened by student loan debt so that they can feel free of that regret of doing what they're doing today or that regret of getting a college education. I don't think that should be something people struggle with. So that's the short story of how I chose to really hone in on this area.
Well, you touched on the psychological effect and burden of carrying such astronomical student loans. And we know that student loan debt has a very big emotional effect on individuals that carry student loan debt. There's a lot of shame around carrying student loan debt. And, some people will say, and you alluded to this as well, doctors make a lot of money. So with them, graduating with $250,000 worth of student loan debt, that's nothing. They make that in a year. But when you put that into perspective, that's relative to, the average person graduating with $50,000 to $75,000 in student loan debt, depending on what type of university you went to, and then starting out at a job where you're making, maybe 40 to 60 a year. That's still a large burden on you financially, as well as psychologically and emotionally. There's a lot attached to it. And then, as you mentioned as well, it's such a complex system. It's not black and white by any means. And you hear all of these horror stories where people are like, I've paid on my student loans for 10 plus years and the balance has actually gone up. It doesn't go down. And I have paid, X amount of thousands and thousands of dollars towards my student loans, and the balance continues to rise. And so, just putting it into perspective for people, just because they're a doctor, and they make a higher income doesn't make that, easier for them.
It really doesn't. And you've actually hit on some really critical points that I'm going to reinforce here. It's all about the ratio of your debt to your income. Like you called it, like someone who makes $50,000 but has $100,000 of student loan debt, it feels like the same burden as someone who makes $250,000 a year but has $500,000 of student loan debt, right? And especially for a lot of these high income young professionals, they in some ways they have less discretionary proportionate income in the end because they're also in higher tax rates than the rest of us. Right. Like you take all that into effect and the burden is very much the same, if not worse, just because they're looking at, more zeros at the end of their debt balance. But to segue here into how important it is to understand your options with student loan planning. The great thing about student loan debt is that there are flexible features and options to it that no other debt has. So I find, and I hope this is helpful to anybody listening who feels burdened by their student loans, I find that sometimes the sort of emotional, psychological coaching around some of these things I'm going to share here is sometimes the more valuable thing for people than the numbers side of the advice I give, which obviously ends up saving people a lot of money once they choose the right student loan strategy for them. But oftentimes how I start a discussion with my student loan consultation clients is I say, okay, first of all, I just want you to know that, I understand how you're feeling about this student loan debt, but we can make a plan to get rid of it. And when we look at the numbers, it's going to give you clarity on how things are going to work out. Because the reality is, if you're in a high student loan debt situation, which for me is like, again, it's all about the ratio. If you have more debt than your income, it's going to feel hard, regardless of what your particular numbers are.
So let's take just a minute to talk about this episode's sponsor, Hidden Compass. Hidden Compass is pretty cool, guys. It's not your normal run-of-the-mill travel magazine where they're going to tell you what to go buy or where to take a selfie, but it's more of a place to find courage and curiosity. It's inspired by the farm-to-table movement, and they are making journalism personal. They have forged an alliance to turn storytellers and explorers into heroes and to champion a new age of discovery. So to learn more about Hidden Compass and their mission, take a look at their website. It's hiddencompass.net. And there you'll be able to read more about their award-winning magazine, and they have a podcast, which is easy to find. It's called Hidden Compass, the podcast. And Sabine and Savani, they are the narrators of the stories for their award-winning magazine. And then they go behind the scenes in interviews with each of the storytellers to see what inspired them to venture to the frontiers of courage and curiosity. So make sure to go check out Hidden Compass at hiddencompass.net.
But I think what really gets people is that the psychological burden is worse than the objective financial burden. By that, I mean that there's this adage or this proverb that, let's see if I can get this right. A bad known is a lot better than something unknown.
Yeah.
Really the fear of the unknown of like, what is going to happen with my finances long-term because of these student loans? Like, how much am I going to pay? How long am I going to have it? If you don't know those things, it just it seizes your brain and you continue to live that fear cycle from month to month and from year to year. Now, what if you create a student loan plan, you get all these projections, you get a clear idea of, okay, if I take this route, this is how much I will pay. Here's what my payments might look like for the next 5, 10, 15, maybe even 20 years. But I can hit, I can look at the options and there's forgiveness plans out there, where if I work for a public or nonprofit employer, I can have my debt wiped out in 10 years. Or if I work in a private sector, there are plans where I can have my debt, the remaining debt, regardless of what the balance has grown to, wiped out after 20 or 25 years. And it's surprising where initially people come in a lot of time, they're like, I've heard of these long-term plans, or I've heard of taking a more balanced approach to my student loan debt, but I can't imagine, holding on to it that long. And I say, I understand. I know that's a hard thing to swallow, but let's just look at the numbers and see what happens. And sometimes we show people, listen, even though the debt's going to be there for longer, and yes, you're going to have to pay a lot of dollars toward it, let's just accept that for what it is. And this is accepting the bad known, right? It's going to be a part of your life. Let's just accept that. But once they see a clear plan for how it's going to happen, which a lot of people end up being surprised that the total amount they'll pay a lot of the time over 20 or 25 years is oftentimes the same or not that much more than what they would pay in aggregate if they actually buckled down and sacrificed a lot and had to pay off the full balance over 10 years. And then for a lot of people with really high ratios, double the debt to their income, we often are able to construct a plan where you say, listen, I know the student loan debt is going to be a part of your life for twice as long if you follow this plan that we're showing you here, but you're actually going to have way less money obligated toward this than if you paid the whole balance off in full. That's how flexible some of these features are. Now, we don't know exactly how it's going to work out. The numbers for someone, in some cases, being on a long-term plan, they will end up paying more total towards that debt than if they, refinance to a lower interest rate, use kind of the conventional accelerated debt payoff mentality. But the flip side is they will have to sacrifice a lot more. And when we start to look at the holistic approach of someone's life and what goals they might have, what are these other things people are wanting to do in the first 5 to 10 years after they finish school? There are some things that, to me, honestly, like, you cannot put a financial value to. Like, who am I to tell someone, the numerical right answer to optimize debt payoff is to refinance your loans to as low of a rate as possible, make every sacrifice, continue to live like a college student. And look at this, you will only pay X amount towards your student loan debt and pay it off in 7 years. Oh, but by the way, you can't get married. You can't start a family. You can't buy a home. You drive a junker car. And it's like, how realistic is that for a lot of people?
Well, you see that a lot, especially with like the millennial generation. Another nickname has been like the generation of student loan debt, right? I mean, we are the most in student loan debt of all generations, the most highly educated, yet, the rate of marriage and children and saving for retirement, investing is significantly lower than other generations. And so you see that people are putting off the next stages of their life, like, getting married and having kids, as you said. And, a lot of people feel like they cannot do both. And it sounds like it's more of an emotional decision because the numbers can support them doing both. Is that safe to say?
It is. And again, a lot of the tactics you would have to implement if you were to try to take a more balanced approach, they're gonna kind of fight against what you've probably learned so far about how you should handle debt. Right? Because with other kinds of debt, again, and we've heard this and you've taught this really well on many episodes of your show, if you have high interest credit card debt or really bad interest car loan or something, like, make extra payments, try to budget well, come up with extra money, make extra payments, save on interest, right? Or refinance it to a lower rate. And that all makes sense because those kinds of debt, they can never be forgiven, right? Or they don't have options to be like, hey, can I suspend payments for a year or two while I get stuff built up in my savings or work on other financial goals? Federal student loans have all of those kind of options there. And so, I'll just give one example of how you can utilize some of the flexibility to still build towards other financial things. Okay, let's say you're out, and again, I work primarily with mostly couples, some single individuals too, but I work primarily with both married and unmarried couples that are about 2 or 3 years or less out of college. And they're at this life stage where they're like, what should I do? Like, this student loan debt, I know I'm going to have to face the music at some point and figure out what I'm going to do with it. But we really want to buy a home. We're so sick of renting. We're seeing real estate. It's chasing a moving target. And then you have that emotional burden weighing on you, right? Like how you're never going to become a homeowner anymore. Well, sometimes I say, hey, if we get you on an income-driven repayment plan right now, as soon as you're out of school, guess what? You're actually probably not going to have a payment at all because they're going to be basing it on your income from your last year of college, which was 0. You weren't working yet. People are like, oh, really? Is that how it works? Yeah. It's not going to be based on your current salary when you first got out of college. They're going to look at your last tax return and did you make anything last year? No, I was finishing college. Okay. Yeah. So your first year is going to be $0 payments. Okay. And so what if you take that year, instead of making student loans, to build up your emergency fund, actually build up a little bit and decide to get married or tackle other high interest debt. Just start getting other pieces of your financial foundation there. Now, here's the thing. There's some people out there going, but Justin, you have accrued interest, right? If you're not making payments, sure, you can put that off on your federal student loans, but don't you have accrued interest? To that I say, yes. But sometimes when we show people the math, they're surprised at, the accrued interest is not what we thought. So a couple things to know about accrued interest on student loans. Number one, based on which repayment plan you're on, there are often interest accrual subsidies by the federal government. Not the full amount of unpaid interest is actually stacking on top of your loans. One other thing to note, this isn't 100% the case, so there are some technicalities here, but student loan interest is simple interest. It's not compound interest. Now, there are things that can happen, I'm not going to get into them now, where the interest capitalizes and can become part of your new principal. But once you're on a repayment plan already, if you're ever suspending payments or your payments are so low that you're not covering all the interest for that month, interest is simple interest that's not compounding. They keep track of the principal and the interest buckets separately. So those are all things that actually lead it to, yeah, maybe there's some accrued interest, but if you accelerate your home purchase by a year or two or something, right, because you skip student loans just for a little bit to save for a down payment on a home, isn't it maybe worth it to acquire an asset like real estate faster in your life? And then like 1 year of really like even modest appreciation on a home, the increase of value is going to be way more than whatever accrued interest you got on your student loans on the debt side of your balance sheet.
Now, are you starting a new business and you might be concerned about using your personal number? Well, for less than $13 per user, you can get a business line with Flex Plans. This is the all-new business phone plan by Virtual PBX. Flex Plans provides unlimited calling, business texting, video conferencing, all for entrepreneurs that need a way to connect with their customers. And it includes a free soft phone, plus it includes 2 free local toll-free numbers, a virtual receptionist, professional greetings, call forwarding, voicemail, text, and just so much more. So right now you can save 15% by visiting virtualpbx.com/podcast. Now that's less than $13 per user for your business line. So separate your private line from your professional line today by visiting virtualpbx.com/podcast. Gosh, especially in this real estate market, right?
Exactly. Or another example is, we know this, it's a classic dilemma in financial planning is, if I have surplus money, should I pay off debt or should I invest more? Well, we all know how the time value of money calculation examples work, right? We see the classic, Bob starts saving $500 a month when he's 25 years old, and his sister Jen starts when she's 30 years old and saves $1,000 a month. But who always ends up with more is the person who started earlier, right? Whenever you see those examples. What if you start investing earlier in your life? That compound value of those extra years is in the long run going to be worth more to you than the comparatively small amount of accrued interest you might face for a year or two.
Absolutely.
So that's just a great example, just some context, how you can utilize the flexibility of student loan plans to look more holistically at your situation and say, is it better for my dollars to go towards some other places instead of just being so siloed and focused on the student loans? Because that's, again, I know it's kind of like the squeaky wheel gets the grease, or the pain point is what you're going to allow your attention to get sucked in by. But we really try to encourage people to look at the bigger picture.
Yeah. And you had talked about this earlier, but we see this not just with student loans, but with finances in general, where individuals will put on their like money blinders, right? And it's like, if I don't look at my credit card balance, therefore it's not there. If I don't look at my bills coming due, if I don't open my mail, then I don't have to pay the bill, right? So, and then people get themselves in trouble. And so it's the same concept with your student loans. By not looking into the options and running the numbers and then weighing and measuring the options of the tactical numbers as well as the emotional effect that the student loans have on you, it's not going to make the problem go away. It's like, as you mentioned, a bad unknown is a lot better. A bad known is a lot better than an unknown. So, don't put your blinders on and, just keep your head buried in the sand. You have to talk to a professional, especially if you feel like you're not able to make progress on your own. And if you have, would you say, more debt than your annual income, what is the level where an individual should definitely look at working with a professional on their student loans versus, a do-it-yourself approach?
Yeah, great question. Obviously, the cop-out answer is it depends. But I think a good rule of thumb is if you have student loan debt that is equal to your income or more, you definitely should. And if you have student loan debt less than your annual income, but you think that student loan debt might impede something like qualifying for a home, because of your debt to income ratio, that could be another really good reason to do it. And we've helped a lot of people with that, where we say, hey, guess what? Even though your long-term plan, maybe you want to pay it off quicker, but jump onto like an extended plan for a bit so that it doesn't look so high on your debt to income ratios, go get the home you want. And then as long as it fits with your budget and you can make it work, then go back after you qualify for the mortgage to making the bigger student loan payment again. So, I mean, there's all kinds of things that we can do with a student loan plan to try to enable another important financial goal to happen for you. And so if you think we could, make something like that happen, then getting a student loan plan could be helpful, even if your debt is less than your income.
And again, it's small tactical changes, having a plan outlined. And I feel like that's empowering for someone who is struggling or feels a large burden with their student loans. I have a question for you, because student loans have been a hot topic with our current administration. And there's been a lot of bills that are being proposed. And a lot of people are talking about the $50,000 in forgiveness per student loan borrower. What's your take on that? And I mean, what do you think, could potentially come to fruition in the future?
Yeah, and I'm going to give credit where credit's due. I know you've had Travis Hornsby on your show. He follows the industry really well and is a fantastic student loan advocate. And I would highly recommend people go back and listen to that episode and follow his website, his blog, his podcast. I'm more of a practitioner than someone who researches this directly. And so I'm kind of following people like Travis, Adam Minsky. I'd encourage people to go follow him, as well as Heather Jarvis, all the good voices to follow in the student loan industry. But I'm going off of a lot of what they said and then some of my own following this stuff. People are getting really excited right now about large amounts of student loan debt cancellation happening. I wouldn't bet on it, try to put my money on it. Biden has been pretty consistent from before he was elected of saying that he is a proponent of something like maybe $10,000 being canceled per borrower, which is great. And especially for the lowest income part of society, that $10,000 is a really big burden. Just to clear that off for them could be awesome.
Oh, absolutely.
But I just don't see how people who are like, well, maybe they should just cancel all student loan debt. $1.5 trillion. Like, really, do you think the government's going to just say, you know what? Let's not ask for this $1.5 trillion that we currently collect on. That's just not going to happen. And so I wouldn't bet on that. What I would bet on happening, and we'll see. It can flip flop, right, from presidency to presidency too. But I can see them consolidating all these complex repayment options into one single option.
So different ways to pay it back to make it simpler, but not necessarily forgiveness. And that's your take. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That can change. I think the forgiveness programs that are here now will stay in place. So let me provide some comfort on that. I know some people are really skeptical of or scared to shoot for a 10-year public service loan forgiveness, which is tax-free forgiveness, or go for the 20 or 25-year plans where you pay for 20, 25 years, and then at the end it's forgiven, but there could be a tax bill associated with it. People are sometimes skeptical of those staying in place. Or what if I'm in year 18 on a 20-year track and they pull the rug and take that away? And again, I'm not guaranteeing this to anybody, but I don't think you have to worry about that happening. If they take away any forgiveness programs, it will be for new borrowers going forward. And anybody who is already in the student loan system will have the current options available to them. Or if they change them, it will be in the direction of it being better for you, not worse. And here's why. This is an opinion of a couple of the attorneys that are advocates in this space. When the federal government loans you a student loan, they actually have a promissory note, which is like the contract between them and you as the borrower, just like any lender does. And so they are also tied to whatever terms they offered to you when they gave you your student loans. And in the promissory notes are the verbiage of, you can get on these kind of income-driven repayment plans. You can have public service loan forgiveness after 10 years. And so if the government ever actually pulled that out from 43 million borrowers at once, it would basically be like violating individual loan contracts or promissory notes to 43 million people. From my understanding, I'm not a lawyer on this. I'm listening to the lawyers who have said this. It would be like the most obvious, not even that much of a debate that it'd just be like a big class action lawsuit. So I just don't see that happening. And I know that's a big worry that a lot of people mention. So I'm glad you asked about that, Courtney. If they make any changes of pulling away forgiveness, I believe it will be for new borrowers going forward. And actually for, I think, 2 or 3 presidents in a row that, I think Obama and Trump both had proposals to reform student loans that they tried to push through that never happened. Both of them, any of these big scale changes that they were proposing, all of them were for like new borrowers going forward, starting next year type of stuff. Not we're taking this out from everybody who's already in the system.
Well, I think it's important to note to not, count your, eggs before they hatch or whatever the saying is, because if your, plan is to hopefully have forgiveness happen or, something that's in the future that's not already available to you, that's not a very good plan. So the best thing that someone with student loan debt can do is to take off their blinders, meet with a professional, and come up with a really good plan. And then if something changes in the future that's in your favor, then that's fantastic. It's gravy on top for you to be able to, make, the payoff quicker or whatever the case may be. But I think definitely don't count on that as your plan, which I know a lot of people are like, you know what, I'm going to suspend my payments. I'm going to go in forbearance. And then, by then the forgiveness should be in place. It's like, that, you don't want to count on that. And as you mentioned, it's been multiple presidencies now where it's changed hands and, there still hasn't been change made. And we need to remember that, student loans, anybody who is a borrower to the government is we're a cash flowing asset to the government. So the likelihood of them forgiving us of our debt is pretty slim.
It is. And that's really wise what you mentioned. And I think another way to put it is you hope for the best, but plan and act as if the worst is going to happen.
Absolutely.
Right. And so if you really, even with my clients who hear me say what I just shared, I often encourage them to say, but let's actually save and invest enough money that even if they did pull that out, you would be ready to tackle that in some kind of way and still pay off your loans in full. So then you're hedging against the absolute worst case scenario that, again, I think is really unlikely to happen. But again, plan for the worst, hope for the best. It's the best way to move forward.
I love it. Okay, if the listeners could only take away one thing from this episode, they just had amnesia and they could only remember one thing that you said, what do you want it to be?
The psychological burden of your student loan debt is probably a lot worse than the objective actual financial burden it can be on your life.
And that's why it's so important to create a plan, because you can alleviate that psychological and emotional burden by just looking at the numbers, having a professional run through that with you, and giving you some light at the end of the tunnel. So, Justin, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Where can the listeners find you if they, want to talk more about their student loans and research this a little bit more?
Yeah, our website, www.wealthmode.com, and there's a hyphen in there actually, so wealth-mode.com. We're very transparent. We have several service options. We try to be as accessible as possible. There's a lot of like one-time consultations type stuff, or deeper financial plan design, higher level services, whatever works best for you. And we do a free intro call with anybody just to learn more about their situation and suggest which service might be best for them to start with.
Well, I'll make sure to go ahead and link that as well. So wealth-mode.com. I'll link it in the show notes, guys. That way you can make sure to just easily click on it. And if you have student loan debt, or someone, a loved one, a family member, a friend, a spouse, it's a great resource for you to be able to reach out and just have a free consultation, run the numbers, take off your blinders and run the numbers and have that conversation with Justin and his team to see if this is something that would benefit you. So again, thank you so much, Justin, for coming on. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Courtney.
Okay, guys, if you're not already, make sure you're following us on Instagram, TikTok, all the socials. It's at Financially Free Journey. And I post daily tips and motivation to help you on your road to financial freedom. Until next time.